Hello. Tonight, we will step back more than 150 years ago to a salty coastal region where waves crash. In Porbandar, India, where you will witness a life beginning from extreme shyness, then gradually becoming a beacon for world peace. You will walk through white limestone houses, weaving through the scent of incense and the sound of prayers to meet a small boy, afraid of the dark, afraid of ghosts, whose name would later become a symbol for the power of the soul. You can hardly imagine how a great man could once tremble so much if born in the form of that little boy, an extremely shy child, afraid of everything around him, and often running straight home as soon as school ended, because he did not dare look anyone in the face. Just think about it. You were born into a powerful family, but your soul is as fragile as a leaf in the wind, always yearning to find a truth to cling to in a world full of harsh rules. Before lying down comfortably, remember to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly find what I do here is lovely. Comment where you are listening and what time it is. I read them all. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the electric fan for a gentle background sound, and let us drift together into tonight's journey. A day in October 1869, when the waves of the Indian Ocean began to tell the story of a great Mahatma. You close your eyes. Let your breath slow down, steady like the rhythm of the tide washing over the white sands of Porbandar. You are returning to 1869, to a small coastal town on the Kathiawar Peninsula in western India. Here, the air is filled with the salty scent of the Arabian Sea, mingling with the smell of white limestone from the ancient houses. That city was known as the White City. And you are a part of those limestone walls, of the narrow alleys and the golden sun-drenched afternoons. You were born into a family of the Banya caste merchants, but the blood flowing in your family's veins has carried the breath of politics for 3 generations. Your father, Karamchand Gandhi, was the Diwan, the Prime Minister of Porbandar state. In your mind, your father appears as a solid stone statue. A man of integrity, brave to the point of harshness, yet carrying within him an anger that burns like fire. He did not have a formal education, but his wisdom was forged from rugged, practical experiences. And your mother, Putlabai, she was the soul, the softest light in that house. You see your mother through the austere fasting rituals of the Pranami sect, a strange and beautiful combination of Hinduism and Islam. Your mother was so devout that her presence was inseparable from vows. You vividly remember the rainy days when she vowed not to eat until the sun shone. You and your siblings would often stand in the courtyard, small eyes gazing up at the gray sky, praying for a ray of sunlight to pierce through the clouds so that your mother could eat. Your mother's silent steadfastness planted the first seeds in your heart regarding the power of endurance and absolute faith. However, in contrast to your family's powerful status, you, in your childhood years, were a shy and fearful being. You were so afraid of the dark that you dared not step out of the room when the lights were out. You were afraid of ghosts, of the flickering shadows on the wall, afraid of snakes hidden in the grass, and afraid of thieves lurking in the night. Even as a teenager, you still had to sleep with a bright lamp beside you to dispel the obsession. In the eyes of your sister Raliat, you were a child, restless as Mercury. You liked twisting dogs' ears. You liked running and jumping. But when standing before a crowd, you would shrink back like a snail. At the school in Rajkot, you were only an average student, nothing remarkable. You avoided group games, stayed away from the laughter of friends. As soon as the school bell rang, you immediately ran straight home. You ran because he was so timid that he would run home from school the moment classes ended, and afraid to talk to anyone. You feared ridicule, feared social interaction, as if it were a storm. But inside that shy shell, a strange obsession with truth began to sprout. Once, you watched a play about King Harishchandra, the king who would rather lose everything than ever tell a lie. That image haunted you in your dreams. You asked yourself thousands of times, why can't everyone live as truthfully as Harishchandra? It was not just a play, it was a call from the depths of your soul. Then the milestone of May 1883 arrived. You were only 13 years old then, a child still struggling with invisible fears. You were swept into an arranged marriage with Kasturbai Mukherjee Kapadia, a girl who had also just turned 13. To save money, the family held a joint wedding for you, your brother, and a cousin. You remember the colorful clothes, the noisy music, but in your heart was a mess of curiosity and the instinct of possession. Later, you confessed to being a jealous and possessive husband. You set strict rules for your young wife, not allowing her to go anywhere without your permission. You tried to play the role of a teacher, teaching her to read and write, but the carnal desires of adolescence always triumphed over your will. You were obsessed with Kasturba. Even when sitting in the classroom, your mind was not on the books. You confessed, even at school I used to think of her, and the thought of nightfall and our subsequent meeting was ever haunting me. The conflict between carnal desire and reason began to create the first cracks in your awareness. Your teenage years consisted not only of childish love, but also of painful undercurrents of rebellion. Under the guidance of your friend Sheikh Mehtab, you began to doubt your family's faith. Mehtab told you that the English were tall and strong because they ate meat, while Indians were weak because they only ate vegetables. He recited a rhyme to you. The mighty Englishman rules the Indian small, because being a meat eater, he is 5 cubits tall. And so, you secretly ate goat meat by the riverbank. Every piece of meat that went down your throat was a terrible torment. You felt as if the goat were bleeding inside your stomach all night. You also secretly smoked cigarettes, even stealing small coins from the servants to satisfy that habit. Once, out of curiosity, you were led to a brothel. But standing at the threshold of sin, you froze out of shame and fear, only to be chased out in humiliation. The peak of the rebellion was when you stole a bit of gold from your brother's bracelet to pay a debt. Remorse choked your heart. You could no longer bear this deceit. You decided to write a confession letter and give it to your father as he lay ill. You tremblingly handed over the paper, bracing yourself for an outburst of rage or a harsh punishment. But no, your father finished reading, but he did not say a word. Hot tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks, soaking the confession paper. Those tears, for you, had more power than any physical punishment. They were like washing away the impurities in your soul. That was the first lesson on the power of confession and tolerance. Yet, the greatest darkness was still ahead. In 1885, when you were 16 years old, your father fell seriously ill. Every night, you devotedly massaged his feet, caring for him with all your filial piety. But on that fateful night, lust rose once again. Seeing that your father seemed to be fast asleep, you left the sickbed to return to your room with your pregnant wife. Only a few minutes later, a knock came at the door. A servant rushed in to announce, "Your father is gone." The world around you seemed to collapse. You felt like a murderer, an unfilial son who had prioritized animalistic desire over the final duty to his beloved father. If animal passion had not blinded me, I should have been spared the torture of separation from my father during his last moments. That pain was multiplied many times over when your firstborn child, born shortly after, also passed away early. You considered it a punishment from destiny. This psychological scar would follow you for the rest of your life, forming a strict view on chastity and self-control later on. Time passed, and you graduated from high school in 1887, but felt out of place at Samaldas College. A family friend advised you to go to England to study law. That was the only way you could succeed your father and save the family status. But the idea of crossing the black waters was a taboo for your caste. The elders threatened to expel you from the community. Your mother, Putlibai, was also full of worry about the temptations in the far-off West. To reassure your mother, in the presence of a monk, you placed your hand on the scripture and made a solemn vow. You swore to absolutely avoid 3 things in London: abstain from meat, alcohol, and women. With that vow as a protective shield, you received your mother's tearful blessing. On the 4th of September 1888, you left Bombay on a ship bound for London. You left behind your young wife and your small son, Hari Lal, who had just been born. You stood on the deck of the ship, looking toward the unfamiliar horizon, your heart filled with confusion but also full of determination. You did not yet know that this trip would change not only your life, but the entire course of human history. The sound of waves hitting the side of the ship began to grow steadier. You feel the chill of the ocean approaching. Take a deep breath and let your mind drift with that current toward foggy London, where new challenges await you. The ship SS Clyde cuts through the waves, taking you away from Bombay Harbor, away from the golden sands and the blazing sun of your homeland. You stand there, in the middle of the deck, feeling the salty air of the ocean soaking into your clothes. But in your heart, another storm is smoldering. It is the echo of the criticism from the elders of the Modbania caste. They said that your crossing the black waters was a betrayal, an act that defiled the soul and stripped away your religious status. You were declared outcast, pushed to the margins of the community you had always belonged to. Yet, in the heart of an 18-year-old boy, the desire to prove oneself, to become a famous lawyer in England, was stronger than the fear of being forsaken. You lightly touch your chest, where the sacred vow you made before the Jain monk Bacharji is kept. Abstain from meat, alcohol, and women. That vow was not just a promise to your mother, Putlibai, but it was like the only lifeline holding on to your identity as you threw yourself into a completely foreign world. London welcomed you with thick fog and a biting cold that seeped through your skin. You found yourself small and lost among the busy streets, the horse-drawn carriages clattering on stone roads, and the rushing crowds. Everything was so new to the point that it terrified you. You still remember the feeling of standing before an elevator for the first time. He walks into what he thinks is a room, and suddenly the room is moving. Your heart raced with an invisible fear. That fear was not just of machinery, but the fear of being considered backward, a provincial person in the capital of light. To hide the insecurity gnawing at your soul, you decided to undergo a spectacular transformation. You wanted to become a true English gentleman. You spent hours at shops on Bond Street to choose the most expensive suits. You placed a chimney pot hat on your head. You looked in the mirror, adjusted your elaborately knotted tie, and held a luxurious walking stick in your hand. You enrolled in dance classes, though your feet, accustomed to Eastern rhythms, became clumsy on the wooden floor. You studied French, learned the violin, and strove to practice your pronunciation to sound most like a native. You spent money and time on those frivolous things, hoping that the aristocratic shell would protect you from judgmental stares. But every night, when returning to your small rented room, you faced a harsh reality. It was hunger. Food in London was a torment for you. The vegetarian dishes of the landlady were bland vegetarian food. You often had to go to sleep with an empty stomach because you could not find anything palatable that did not violate the vow to your mother. You began to wonder, would this outward glamour truly bring you confidence, or were you just losing yourself in an unreal dream? The turning point came on a fateful afternoon when you were wandering on Farringdon Street and happened to see a vegetarian restaurant. The soft yellow light from the restaurant window seemed to invite you. You stepped in, and for the first time in months, you enjoyed a full meal. At the small bookstore next door, you found Henry Salt's book, Plea for Vegetarianism. You devoured every page of that book that very night, and a new light began to seep into your mind. You realized that vegetarianism was not just an ascetic restriction to keep a vow to your mother, but it was a noble philosophy of life, an ethical and humane choice. From that moment on, you were no longer a vegetarian by force. You became a vegetarian by choice. You gave up all efforts to become a fake gentleman. You returned the expensive clothes, stopped dance lessons, stopped the violin. You chose to live a simple, frugal life, spending time to study and participate in the London Vegetarian Society, LVS. Here, among like-minded people, you began to learn how to raise your voice. You remember the heated debate between Arnold Hills and Dr. Thomas Allinson. Hills wanted to expel Allinson because of his views supporting birth control, something Hills considered immoral. You, though in your heart also opposed artificial contraceptive measures, felt something was wrong if a person's right to speak was stripped away just because they were different. You decided to stand up for Allinson, defended Allinson's right to differ. You had prepared a short speech, but when standing before the crowd, shyness surrounded you again. Your throat tightened. Your limbs trembled. Finally, you had to ask someone else to read your writing for you. Even so, that was your first victory over fear. It was the beginning of a rock-solid moral principle. Justice is more important than consensus. London did not just teach you about law. It was also where you began the journey back to your own soul. It is strange that right here in this Western land, you first truly studied Hinduism deeply. Through the introduction of two friends from the Theosophical Society, You held in your hands the Song Celestial, the English translation of the Bhagavad Gita by Sir Edwin Arnold. The verses rang out like temple bells in the heart of the noisy city. The concept of renunciation, of performing one's duty without regard for the results, touched the deepest part of your soul. You felt as if you had just found a forgotten treasure right in your own home. At the same time, you also opened your heart to other religions. You read the Bible. While the Old Testament, with its long chapters of history, sent him to sleep, the New Testament brought a powerful spiritual force, especially the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' teaching about turning the other cheek went straight to my heart. You began to notice an invisible link between the compassion of Buddhism, the patience of Jainism, and the love of Christianity. Those pieces gradually formed the foundation of the non-violent philosophy that you would pursue for the rest of your life. You buried yourself in your studies at the inner temple. The thick law books, the public speaking practice sessions to hone your skills. You worked tirelessly to overcome your shyness and the language barrier. And then, on the 10th of June, 1891, the moment you had long awaited arrived. You were officially called to the bar. A day later, your name was registered at the High Court. At the age of 22, you had become a qualified barrister. On the 12th of June, 1891, you stepped onto the ship to return to India. In your luggage was a prestigious law degree and a fierce belief that you would build a glorious career to help your family. You stood on the deck, watching the waves hit the side of the ship, your heart bursting with hope for the day of reunion with your mother. You wanted to show her that you had kept the vow, that you had grown up and become successful. But when the ship docked at Bombay, a cruel reality dealt you a fatal blow. Your brother met you with a mournful face, and the bad news was finally uttered. Your mother, Putli-Bai, had passed away months before while you were still in London. The family had kept the news secret for fear that the pain would prevent you from completing your studies. The sky seemed to collapse under your feet. The woman who was the greatest spiritual inspiration, the one you always yearned to see again the most, was now gone forever. You felt like an orphan in your own homeland. The pain of losing your mother, combined with the old insecurity rising again, and caused your career to start in bitter failure. In Bombay, you were given your first case. You wore your lawyer's robe, stood before the judge, surrounded by expectant eyes. But when it was your turn to speak, your throat tightened. He simply is not able to open his mouth before the judge. All the knowledge, all the skills practiced in London vanished. You stood frozen, trembling, then finally had to return the case file and run out of the courtroom in utter humiliation. You saw yourself as a failure. A lawyer who could not speak, a son who could not see his mother one last time, a person rejected by his caste. You fell into a state of extreme crisis and deadlock. Yet, in that darkness, another door slowly opened. A job offer from an Indian firm in South Africa appeared as a final ray of hope. You take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of your homeland gradually becoming distant as you prepare to embark on a new journey. A journey where humiliation will turn into strength, and the shy lawyer will begin his journey to become a saint. Let your mind relax to the beat of your heart and prepare for the first steps on the turbulent land of South Africa, where destiny is truly beginning. You stepped down from the gangplank at Durban Port on a morning in May 1893. The sweltering humidity of South Africa surrounds you, carrying the scent of the ocean and the expectations of a new beginning. You were then a 2-3-year-old lawyer, dressed in a neat Western suit, but still wearing the traditional turban of your homeland on your head. You did not come here to start a revolution, but only to settle a business lawsuit for the merchant Dada Abdullah, a 1-year contract, a steady job to prove your capability. However, right from the first steps, this land threw a bucket of cold water on your confidence. Only a few days after arriving, you entered the Durban court as a lawyer. You sat there, upright and dignified, until the British judge looked at you with a cold gaze. He ordered you to remove the turban from your head. In that silent room, you felt your heart beating fast. That turban was not just cloth. It was honor, culture, and the identity you had brought from India. Instead of bowing to an insulting command, you chose to stand up, turn around, and walk out of the court to the astonishment of those present. The next day, the local press called you an unwelcome visitor, a bitter start, signaling the storms to come. The night of the 7th of June, 1893. A freezing winter night that you would later remember as the moment of your soul's rebirth. You were on a train to Pretoria, sitting in a first-class carriage with a valid ticket in hand. When the train stopped at Pietermaritzburg station, a white passenger entered. He looked at you, a person of color sitting in the first-class carriage, with visible disgust. He called the railway official and demanded that you go down to the third-class carriage reserved for people of color. You resisted with logic, with the ticket you had bought with your own money. But here, the logic of a person of color held no value against the skin color of the ruler. The police appeared. You were violently thrown off the train along with your luggage. The train whistled and receded into the night, leaving you alone on the dark, cold platform. You sat there, shivering in the bone-chilling cold of the South African winter night. The space was so silent that you could hear your own rapid breathing. In the deserted waiting room, a fierce internal struggle broke out. On one side was fear, urging you to give up and return to India for safety. On the other side was the humiliation burning into a flame of will. You asked yourself, will I stay and fight, or will I run away? Later, you called that night the most creative experience of his life. In the darkness of Pietermaritzburg station, you found your life's purpose, to root out the disease of color prejudice. You were no longer the lawyer only seeking fame. You had begun to become a warrior. The journey to Pretoria continued, but the pain did not stop there. You had to travel by stagecoach over rugged roads. The man in charge of the coach, a white man, ordered you to sit on the floor of the vehicle to give up your seat to a European passenger who wanted to smoke. When you refused this unreasonable insult, he lunged at you and beat you mercilessly. You felt the punches, the insults, but you still clung tightly to the coach rails. You took the blows rather than letting go, not retaliating with violence, but also refusing to submit. You closed your eyes, feeling the physical pain melting into the steadfastness of your soul. In Johannesburg and Pretoria, you were refused service at luxury hotels just because of your skin color. You were banned from walking on the sidewalks reserved for white people. Each time you were pushed into the gutter, each time you were driven away, you realized a painful truth even more. This humiliation was not meant for you alone. It was a massive system of oppression weighing down on thousands of Indians, from wealthy merchants to poor laborers. You saw yourself in them and saw them in your own pain. We are not alone in oppression, so we should not be alone in the struggle. In 1894, your contract ended. You were ready to return to your homeland. At the farewell party the Indian community organized for you, you happened to read a small news item in the paper about the bill to disenfranchise Indians in the state of Natal. An electric current ran down your spine. If this bill passed, Indians would forever become second-class citizens, without a voice, without rights. The merchants around you were worried. They had money, but lacked legal knowledge. They lacked a guide. They pleaded with you to stay. In that moment, you realized destiny was calling your name. You agreed to stay. The farewell party suddenly turned into the first strategic meeting. You founded the Natal Indian Congress, NIC. This was the first political organization for people of color in South Africa, where you began to learn how to unite fragmented people into a unified bloc. You wrote petitions, you gave speeches, you connected hearts that were trembling with fear. You realized that power does not lie in weapons, but in unity and truth. In 1897, you brought your wife and children to South Africa after a trip back home. But when the ship docked at Durban port, an angry white crowd was already waiting. They saw you as an instigator, a troublemaker. You stepped off the ship and were immediately surrounded by screams, stones, and rotten eggs. You were beaten to the point of nearly losing your life, until the wife of the Durban police chief bravely used her umbrella to shield you. Amidst that frantic violence, you felt no hatred. When the government offered to name the attackers for prosecution, you refused. I do not want to punish them, I want to change them. That selfless act shocked the public, making even enemies respect your character. However, during this period, you still carried a deep faith in the British Empire. You believed that if Indians proved their loyalty and usefulness, they would be treated equally as citizens of the empire. When the Boer War, 1899-1902, broke out between the British and the Boers, you organized the Indian Ambulance Corps with over 1,100 volunteers. You did not carry a gun. You carried a stretcher. You and your comrades bravely marched into the gunfire at the Battle of Spion Kop to treat wounded soldiers. You walked dozens of miles every day under the scorching sun, your shoulders bleeding from the weight of the wounded. You were awarded medals for bravery, but the greatest reward you found was the tempering of discipline and compassion amidst the brutality of war. In 1903, you began publishing the newspaper Indian Opinion. Your voice now had wings, flying across the land of South Africa to awaken the community. But the true transformation of the soul only came in 1904, when you happened to read the book Unto This Last by John Ruskin on a long train journey. That book was like a mirror reflecting your innermost desires. Ruskin spoke of the value of manual labor, that the life of a craftsman is as noble as the life of a lawyer, and that the interest of the individual must lie within the interest of the community. You decided not to just speak of theory anymore. You began to act. You founded the Phoenix Settlement on a pristine piece of land. Here you cast off the expensive lawyer suit to put on simple labor clothes. You and your associates built houses by hand, farmed, and became self-sufficient. You began to practice strict vegetarianism and hard manual labor. Every morning, you woke up when the sky was still misty, feeling the smell of damp earth and the stillness of the soul. This was the phase where you transformed from a Western-educated lawyer to the ascetic lifestyle of a monk. You were carving away the individual self to prepare for a greater power. A power you called Satyagraha, truth force. Take a deep breath. Feel the stillness enveloping the space of the Phoenix settlement. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees. The sound of the earth shifting under the laboring hands. You are standing at the threshold of a great transformation, where truth is no longer a concept, but a weapon that can move the whole world. Let your mind relax completely. Let go of all worries and sink deep into the peace of those first spiritual experiments. You are standing among the tall grass of the natal region, but the deep blue sky of 1906 does not bring peace like at Phoenix Settlement. The dry sound of Gatling machine guns echoes from afar, tearing through the silence of the wilderness. You are participating in the Zulu rebellion, but not as a soldier with a gun. You wear the uniform of the Indian Ambulance Corps, your thin shoulders carrying heavy stretchers. You see what history often covers with glamorous titles. You see Zulu people with only crude spears being struck down by the brutal firepower of the empire. This is not a fair war. This is a manhunt. Deep wounds on the bodies of the natives, the soulless eyes of white soldiers. All echo in your mind a painful question about the nature of violence and dominance. It was during those nights of marching under the faint starlight on that wild land, when the steady rhythm of footsteps on dry earth was the only sound breaking the night, you made a decision that completely changed the person inside you. At the age of 37, you take a vow of perpetual celibacy, brahmacharya. You realize that to serve humanity with a whole heart, you must escape the chains of personal desire. You want to turn your body into a pure instrument of truth. The stillness you find in that vow is the strength that helps you face the storm about to break over the Indian community. As soon as you return from the Zulu battlefield, a legal shadow has enveloped the Transvaal. The government issues the Asiatic Registration Bill, which you and everyone call by the resentful name of the Black Act. You hold the bill in your hand, feeling the coldness of those lines. They require every Indian aged 8 and above to be fingerprinted like criminals, to always carry identification like marked animals. The police have the right to break into your private home at any time. They have the right to demand Indian women, who are usually modest, to remove their veils for identification. You feel an electric current run down your spine. This is not simply a law. This is the ultimate insult to human dignity, an attempt to strip away the final honor of a people. The 11th of September, 1906. You stand on the stage of the Empire Theater in Johannesburg. Before you is a sea of people, 3,000 hearts beating with the same rhythm of anxiety and indignation. The air in the theater is thick and hot, the smell of sweat, the smell of fear mingling together. Suddenly, Sheikh Haji Habib, a respected Muslim merchant, stands up. His voice echoes through the hall, declaring that he would rather go to prison than ever obey that devilish law. In that moment, you feel a powerful spiritual vibration. You realize this is no longer an ordinary political protest. You step forward. Your voice is not loud, but full of authority and stillness. You call on everyone to stand up. You invite them to perform a ritual more sacred than any ballot. Swear before God Swear that we will not comply with unjust laws, even if facing imprisonment or death. We will take a vow to God that we will go to prison and we will stay there until this law is withdrawn. The whole hall shakes with that vow. A new method of struggle was born from within the pain. A resistance not with fists, but with the power of the soul. But you understand that the name passive resistance is not enough. It sounds weak. It carries the tone of silent resentment. You want to find a name that contains the inner strength you are pursuing. Through a small contest, the word Satyagraha was born. A combination of Satya truth and Agraha firmness. Satyagraha. Let that word sink deep into your mind. It is truth force or soul force. It does not seek to destroy the opponent, but seeks to convert them through your own voluntary suffering. You believe that when you endure pain without striking back, you are shining a mirror into the conscience of the oppressor, making them face their own brutality. The first challenge comes in January 1908. You are arrested and stand before the court. You look straight into the eyes of the judge without a trace of fear. You do not defend yourself. On the contrary, you request the highest sentence. You want to prove that prison is not a place to hold criminals, but a sanctuary for those who defend the truth. However, the government broke its promise. The promise to repeal the Black Act was torn up. Anger flares up, but you direct it into a powerful symbolic act. August 1908, at the Hamidiya Mosque courtyard, you stand before a large cauldron of fire. More than 2,000 Indians stand around you, holding their registration cards, symbols of slavery. One by one, the cards are thrown into the fire. The sound of fire crackling, the smoke rising, stinging the eyes. But in that light of the fire, you see freedom being reborn. This act was like an Indian Boston Tea Party, affirming that you no longer recognize unjust rule. To sustain a long-term fight when the main men are arrested and imprisoned, you, along with your German architect friend, Hermann Kallenbach, founded the Tolstoy Farm in 1910. Imagine a vast land where everyone lives together as one family. You make shoes by hand, make bread by hand, teach children, and train the discipline for the Satyagrahas. There, the boundaries between religion, caste, and status are erased. Only humans remain, learning to master themselves, to master their destiny. The biggest storm strikes in 1913. The Cape Supreme Court issues a shocking ruling. Only marriages according to Christian rites are recognized. This means your wife, your mother, and millions of Hindu and Muslim women suddenly become concubines, and their children are illegitimate. At the same time, a harsh 3 pounds poll tax is imposed on poor laborers. You feel Kasturba's trembling when she hears this news, but she does not cry. She looks at you and says, "I will also go to jail." The image of Indian women, who were only accustomed to the kitchen, now bravely crossing the border illegally to accept being imprisoned, exploded an unprecedented wave of indignation. 50,000 coal mine and sugarcane plantation workers simultaneously dropped their tools. The South African economy was paralyzed under the weight of silence. And then, the Great March begins. You lead more than 2,000 people, a ragged army, but with iron discipline. They walk across long miles from Newcastle toward the Transvaal border. You lead the way. with bare feet or simple sandals, steady steps. Every step is an affirmation of dignity. When the police intercept, you do not resist. You are arrested, bailed out, then arrested again repeatedly. They beat those walking with you. They turn the mines into prisons, but they cannot extinguish the fire in the eyes of those workers. News of the white people's brutality toward unarmed resistors spreads across the world. The whole world looks at South Africa with horror. Even the Viceroy of India has to speak out in criticism. The international pressure is so great that General Jan Smuts, your biggest opponent, is forced to sit at the negotiating table. In 1914, the final victory arrived. The Indian Relief Act was passed. The poll tax was abolished, and traditional marriages were recognized. Satyagraha proved its incomparable power. Before leaving South Africa in July 1914 to return to your homeland, you did something that left Jan Smuts stunned. You sent him a gift of leather sandals handmade by yourself while you were in prison, a gift from the prisoner to the jailer. Years later, Smuts himself wrote, "I have worn those sandals every summer, but never felt myself worthy to walk in the shoes of a great man." He breathed a sigh of relief when you left. The saint has left our shores. I sincerely hope forever. The ship takes you away from South Africa, toward the horizon where India is waiting. You stand on the deck, watching the gentle waves. You are no longer the shy lawyer of years ago. You have brought with you a new weapon, a new soul. Take a deep breath. Feel the tranquility after a long fight. The steady sound of the waves, bringing you into a deep sleep to prepare for a greater new chapter in your own homeland. You are standing on the deck, feeling the warm air of your homeland blowing on your face as the ship docks at Bombay on the 9th of January, 1915. It has been 21 years since you left as a young lawyer full of ambitions. Now, at the age of 45, you return as a hero with a resounding reputation from victories in South Africa. You look down at the pier. A sea of people is waiting for you. The cheers echo across the sky. It was in these moments, amidst that fervent admiration, that the great poet Rabindranath Tagore called you by the name Mahatma, the great soul. But amidst those tumultuous sounds, you remember the advice of your political mentor Gopal Krishna Gokhale, an advice that became a compass for you for a whole year. Keep your ears open, but your mouth shut. Gokhale wanted you to understand that the India you knew through books or distant memories was not the real India. You needed to touch the soul of this country before wanting to lead it. And so, you began a strange journey. You gave up luxury transport, gave up the first-class carriages that your fame could certainly have obtained. You chose to sit in the cramped, hot, third-class carriages smelling of sweat. Imagine you are sitting on the hard wooden floor, surrounded by austere farmers, poor craftsmen, the sound of the train chugging steadily on the tracks, the dust of the steam engine blowing into the window. You listen to stories of famine, high taxes, the injustice suffocating every village. You do not speak, you only observe. You see the sunken eyes of your compatriots. And you realize that real India does not lie in the big cities, but in the villages trudging through the mist. In May 1915, you laid the first bricks for the Satyagraha ashram in the Kokrab area. Later, on the banks of the Sabarmati River, close your eyes and imagine the sound of the river water flowing, the sound of the spinning wheel, clicking steadily in the early morning. This is not just a residence, but a laboratory for your soul. Here, you and your comrades took strict vows: truth, nonviolence, and manual labor. However, a great spiritual challenge arrived. You decided to accept an untouchable family to live together in the ashram. A wave of fierce protest broke out. Financial supporters threatened to cut off aid. Even Kasturba, your gentle wife, could not help but be shocked and fearful of thousands of years of traditional barriers. In the stillness of the ashram, you made a rock-solid declaration. If boycotted, I am ready to move to the slums of the untouchables to live. For you, political freedom would become a joke if humans still treated each other like animals of different castes. You chose to stand with the most forsaken. And that very steadfastness gradually converted the frozen hearts around you. The first major turning point came in 1917, when a farmer named Rajkumar Shukla sought you out. His face was deeply lined with the crow's feet of hardship. He told you about the land of Champaran, where farmers were forced to grow indigo on 3/20 of the land area, according to the harsh Tinkathia system. The blue of indigo, which was originally the color of life, now became the color of exploitation and tears. You set out for Champaran. As soon as you arrived, the British government felt an invisible threat. They ordered you to be expelled immediately, but you, with a strange calmness, chose to face it. You stood before the court, without a lawyer, without a complicated defense. You looked straight at the judge and said, I could not obey without doing violence to my sense of duty toward those for whom I had come. That was your first act of civil disobedience on Indian soil. A moment when the entire legal system of the empire had to pause before a small man, but one carrying a giant moral force. The government was forced to concede. And finally, the Champaran Agrarian Act was born, breaking the chains for the indigo farmers. That victory was not just a legal win, it was the first ray of hope lighting up the darkness of slavery. In 1918, you faced another battle, this time at the textile mills in Ahmedabad. But this challenge was more painful because your opponent was Ambalal Sarabhai, a close friend, a benefactor who had once saved your ashram from bankruptcy. You stood in the struggle between friendship and justice for the workers striking for a wage increase. In the scorching hot days of Ahmedabad, the air in the textile workshops was thick with cotton dust and tension. A worker uttered a criticism that hurt your heart. What is it to Anasuya, Ben, and Gandhi? They come and go in their car, they eat sumptuous food, but we are suffering death agonies. Those words were like a knife cutting into your soul. You realized that mere words were not enough. You had to suffer with them. And that was when you carried out your first public hunger strike in India. You abstained from eating not to coerce the enemy, but to awaken the sympathy of both sides. The power of that silent endurance created a powerful psychological wave. The mill owners finally accepted the compromise. You taught them that truth does not need to scream, it only needs sacrifice. Almost at the same time, in Kedah, your homeland of Gujarat, crop failure caused famine to lurk everywhere. Yet the government still insisted on collecting taxes to the last penny. Here, you met Vallabhbhai Patel, an intellectual lawyer who would become your right hand. You and Patel went across the arid fields calling on farmers, better to suffer land confiscation than pay unjust taxes. You turned shy farmers into warriors of truth. Finally, the government had to suspend tax collection. Quetta transformed you from a single activist into a leader who could mobilize millions. But amidst those victories, a great paradox appeared. As World War I entered its decisive phase in 1918, you, a worshiper of nonviolence, went across the countryside to recruit soldiers for the British Army. You believed that if Indians wanted to be treated as equal citizens of the empire, they had to prove their responsibility in the hour of danger. You wrote in leaflets, "To bring about such a state of things, we should have the ability to defend ourselves. That is, the ability to bear arms and to use them." Many doubted you. They asked whether your faith in nonviolence was shaken. But in your mind at that time, it was a tactical move based on trust in British goodwill. You hoped that the blood of Indians shed would be traded for the freedom of the nation. You were exhausted after long days of recruitment trips. Your body was thinner, your eyes more tired, but your will remained as strong as cold steel. You did not yet know that this trust was about to be betrayed in the most brutal way. And an era of total confrontation was preparing to explode. Take a deep breath. Feel the slow beat of your heart. The sound of the wind blowing across the Sabarmati River. The steady sound of spinning, bringing you into a peaceful sleep. Let all worries vanish into the night. Prepare for the great storms of history that are about to come. You were sitting in the quiet darkness of the house in Ahmedabad, listening to the dry monsoon wind blowing through the trees. But that peace is just a thin veneer for a volatile reality. March 1919. News strikes like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. The British colonial government passes the Rowlatt Act. You hold a copy of the act in your hand, feeling the roughness of the paper and the coldness of the lines. They allow the imprisonment of any Indian without trial, without evidence, based only on suspicion of terrorism. Your heart tightens. You remember the months spent traveling through villages to recruit for Britain in World War I? You staked your honor and faith on the promise of self-rule. And now, their answer is even more brutal shackles. You sigh softly, a sigh carrying the weight of regret. You call it a Himalayan miscalculation. You realize you trusted the goodwill of the rulers too much. You call for a nationwide Satyagraha, but when scattered riots break out among an undisciplined crowd, you bravely stop. You would rather admit a mistake than let the truth be stained by the loss of control of violence. But true darkness falls on the 13th of April, 1919. Imagine yourself standing in Amritsar at Jallianwala Bagh, a space surrounded by high walls and suffocatingly narrow entrances. That day was the Baisakhi festival. The air was filled with the scent of flowers and the laughter of thousands gathering peacefully. Children are running and jumping. Elderly people are talking under the shade. Suddenly, the iron chains of military vehicles clank. General Reginald Dyer appears with soldiers. Without a word of warning, no loudspeaker requesting dispersal, Dyer orders to open fire. Listen to the harsh sound of machine guns tearing through the peaceful air. Screams. Chaotic footsteps. But no way out. Soldiers fire continuously for 10 minutes. 10 minutes long, as a millennium of pain. The only reason he stopped firing was that they ran out of ammunition. The smell of gunpowder mingles with the smell of blood. At least 379 souls remained, and more than 1,000 others bear wounds for life. But the brutality did not stop there. Dyer also issued a crawling decree, forcing Indians to crawl on their bellies when passing the street where an English woman was attacked. The image of humans having to crawl on dirt to save their lives shook the very bottom of your soul. You are no longer loyal to the empire. That faith died with the victims at Jallianwala Bagh. You declared this government satanic, and a total confrontation is inevitable. To prepare for this great battle, you know that Indians need to be a unified bloc. You seek out Muslim brothers in the Khilafat movement. You united the Hindus and the Musulmans like sugar and water. You create a current of power that no empire has ever faced. August 1920. You launched the non-cooperation movement. Close your eyes and see the giant fires burning in the middle of the crossroads. You call on everyone to cast off clothes made of foreign imported fabrics. Western-made clothes were cast off into a giant bonfire. The orange of the fire, the gray of the smoke, and the searing heat. It is the casting off of the slave shell. Instead, you give them the spinning wheel, charka. Listen to the steady spinning sound. Rrr, rrr. A sound with deep meditative qualities. You teach them to weave khadi cloth with their own hands. The charka is no longer a simple labor tool. It is a symbol of self-reliance, of not needing them to exist. You call for a boycott of schools, a boycott of courts, returning all titles of glory granted by the British. The whole country is holding its breath, waiting for the collapse of an empire without needing a single bullet. But when the movement is at its peak, when freedom seems right before your eyes, the ghost of violence returns. In the village of Chowri Chowra, in February 1922, an angry mob burned 22 policemen alive in the station. News flies to your hand like a fatal blow. You sit quietly in the small room. To you, a blood-stained victory is a miserable failure of the soul. You make a decision that shocks the whole country. Suspend the entire movement. Comrades like Nehru screamed in frustration. They did not understand why you stopped when so close to the goal. But you look deep into your truth and say, I would rather delay independence than win it through bloodshed. You are ready to bear criticism, the loneliness of a misunderstood guide. To protect the purity of Satyagraha, taking advantage of the movement's confusion, the British imprisoned you in March 1922. You enter that historical trial with strange calmness. You do not defend yourself. You plead guilty to inciting rebellion with a silent pride. You stand before Judge Broomfield, small in white khadi cloth, but with the stature of a mountain. You hear the somber voice of the judge. In the eyes of millions of your countrymen, you are a great patriot and a great leader. He sentences you to 6 years in prison. You smile and thank him. You enter Yerwada prison, and there you turn the jail cell into a monastery. You spend hours reading books and spinning. The rrr sound of the charkha still echoes behind cold stone walls, like a persistent heartbeat of resistance. February 1924. You were released early after an emergency appendectomy. When stepping out of the prison doors, the wind of freedom did not carry the sweetness you imagined. You witness a heart-wrenching reality. The sugar and water alliance between Hindus and Muslims has broken. Bloody religious riots break out everywhere. Brothers who yesterday burned British cloth together now hold knives against each other. The physical pain from the incision is nothing compared to your spiritual pain. You feel you failed in transmitting love. To heal these cracks, you performed a 2-1-day hunger strike in Delhi. You lie there, emaciated and weak, breath slowing, but will still firm. My longing is to be able to cement the two communities with my blood if necessary. Day by day passes. Your strength drains. But that silent sacrifice forced leaders to sit together. A temporary truce is established. This turbulent phase closes. You decide to withdraw from the noise of politics. You return to silent work in the villages. You understand that for an independent country, there must first be independent souls, free of hatred. Take a deep breath. Feel the stillness of the night in Delhi. The wind softly passes through the window, carrying the smell of earth and hope. You are resting to accumulate strength for the greatest journey. A journey that will shake the very roots of the British Empire. Let your mind completely relax, sink into a deep and peaceful sleep. You are sitting on the bank of the Sabarmati River, listening to the murmuring water in the falling sunset. After the storms of the early 1920s, you find yourself in need of a moment of stillness. An emergency appendectomy brought you out of prison earlier than planned. But the outside world you see now is so strange. The unity between Hindus and Muslims, once the soul of the previous movement, has now crumbled. You decide to withdraw. You do not leave the struggle, but you shift it into another form, quieter but deeper. You call it the constructive work. Imagine you are walking through red dirt trails, crossing remote villages where electric light has never touched. You do not talk about politics. You talk about the spinning wheel, charkha. You want every farmer to be able to weave khadi cloth for themselves. The rrr sound of the spinning wheel echoes through the quiet afternoons. To you, that is the music of freedom. Each turn is a silent resistance against dependence on Western industry. You teach them about rural hygiene, about how to clean village roads, and most importantly, you face the greatest wound of Indian society, the vice of untouchability. You call them Harijans, the children of God. You invite them into the ashram, to eat together, to work together. You know that if India cannot clean its own soul from caste discrimination, then political independence is just an empty shell. Time passes at the Sabarmati monastery. You spend hours by the spinning wheel, your mind merging into the pure white threads. This is your spiritual laboratory, where you forge patience and compassion. But then, the call of history rings out again. In 1928, the appearance of the Simon Commission, a commission deciding India's fate but completely devoid of Indians, refueled the fire within you. You realize that the time of silence has ended. At the Congress session in Lahore in December 1929, under the cold night sky, you and your comrades declared a single goal: Purna Swaraj, complete independence. No more self-governing status, no more half-hearted compromises. However, you ponder how to mobilize millions of poor people, those who do not even know how to read, to participate in this great battle. You need a symbol, something that everyone can touch, everyone can understand. And you chose salt. Salt. A tiny, pure white crystal. An essential spice that even the poorest need to sustain life, but which was monopolized and heavily taxed by the British colonizers. Many ridiculed you. Even Nehru doubted, how can salt topple an empire? But you saw in that grain of salt the most visible injustice. You wrote to Viceroy Lord Irwin with calm confidence, "My ambition is no less than to convert the British people through non-violence and thus make them see the wrong they have done to India." The 12th of March, 1930. Dawn has just appeared on the Sabarmati River. You, at the age of 61, with a bamboo staff in your hand and a simple khadi loincloth, begin to walk. Accompanying you are 78 loyal volunteers. You walk 240 miles, about 386 kilometers toward the Dandi Sea. Listen to the sound of the bamboo staff hitting the parched earth. Tap, tap, tap. Your pace is slow, but without any hesitation. Under the scorching tropical sun, drops of sweat roll down your forehead, soaking into the coarse fabric. Through each village, thousands of people step out from their thatched houses. They join the crowd. The march grows longer and longer, looking from afar like a white river flowing through the heart of India. The stillness of the crowd carries a power even more terrifying than the sound of cannons. The 6th of April, 1930, exactly on the anniversary of the Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, you stand before the Dandi coast, the sound of waves murmuring against the sand, the salty smell of salt strong in the air. You bend down. Your thin, trembling hands pick up a handful of salt mud. In that moment, the whole world seems to hold its breath. You declare, "With this salt I resist the might of the British Empire." That simple act created an earthquake. Across the country, people began to boil salt themselves. Women, who were usually confined behind doors, now poured into the streets to protest. Shops selling British cloth were deserted. The British Empire realized with shock that they could not imprison an entire nation taking salt into its own hands. You were arrested in May 1930, but the fire had spread far. Imagine you are in prison, listening to news reports about the raid on the Dharasana salt works. Sarojini Naidu, the woman with a poet's soul, leads the resistance. American journalist Webb Miller stands there, witnessing the horrific scene. British police used steel-tipped clubs to brutally beat the protesters. They did not resist. They offered their heads to take the blows and fell in holy silence. Miller wrote, "I heard the sickening whack of the clubs on unprotected skulls. Those struck fell just like 10 pins. Those words were sent across the world. British rule in India lost its moral legitimacy forever. They might win in muscle power, but they had completely lost to the power of the soul. Sensing a deadlock, Viceroy Lord Irwin was forced to release you and invite you to negotiate. It was an image of dramatic contrast. An authoritative viceroy in a magnificent mansion, sitting opposite a naked old man, as Churchill called him, to sign the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. You won the right for coastal people to make their own salt. A victory of immense symbolic significance. In 1931, you boarded a ship to London to attend the Round Table Conference. London welcomed you with misty cold. People arranged the most luxurious hotels for you, but you refused. You chose to live at Kingsley Hall, a slum in the East End. You wanted to be near the poor, the textile workers who were unemployed because of your own boycott movement. Strangely, those workers loved you. They saw in you a sincerity that crossed all national barriers. The most memorable moment was when you were invited to Buckingham Palace to meet King George V. You walked into the magnificent palace with old sandals and a coarse loincloth. Around you were ceremonial uniforms covered in medals and silk dresses. When a reporter asked if you felt underdressed when meeting the king, you smiled wittily and replied, "The king was wearing enough for both of us." The conference failed politically. The British were not yet ready to let go of power. But spiritually, you had won. You returned to India, standing on the deck, looking toward the distant horizon. You knew the journey was long and full of thorns, but you also knew that tiny grain of salt had truly shaken the foundations of an empire. Take a deep breath. Feel the salty scent of the Dandy Sea. Hear the steady footsteps of the White River. Everything is gradually becoming ethereal. You are enveloped by the stillness of truth. Let your body completely relax. Every muscle, every breath. Sink into a deep sleep where the bright white salt grains glitter like stars, leading the way. You were lying there, on the narrow wooden plank in the cell of your Wada prison. Pale moonlight pierces through the iron bars, casting long shadows on the cold stone floor. The space is so still that you can hear your own slow heartbeat, but your mind is not at peace. August 1932, a message from London tore through the silence of the prison. British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald issued the Communal Award, a decision allowing the Dalits, those considered the lowest class, oppressed for centuries, to have separate electorates. You feel a tightening pain in your chest, not from illness, but from fear for the soul of the nation. For you, this is not a political gift, but a fatal blow. It is the vivisection and disruption of Hinduism. You believe that if they are separated from the common current, they will be forever nailed to the marginal label, instead of being healed and integrated through love. You take a deep breath and make a decision that shakes all of India. The 20th of September, 1932. You declare the start of an indefinite hunger strike, a fast unto death. You do not use weapons to fight the British. You use your own life to awaken the conscience of your compatriots. Imagine the days passing in a terrifying silence. Your body gradually grows thin, eyes sunken, breath as fragile as a thread. But that very exhaustion creates an unprecedented shockwave. Across every village, every city, a miracle happened. Hindu temples that had barred Dalits for thousands of years suddenly threw their doors wide open in repentance. Those of high castes, who had never looked a Dalit in the face, now publicly shared common water sources and bowls of rice. You turned your nearing death into a medicine to heal the deepest spiritual cracks of society. However, amidst that wave of emotion, you must face a sharp and equally resilient intellect. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the leader of the Dalits. Ambedkar looks at you with suspicious eyes. He does not believe in spiritual vows. He believes in practical power. He speaks directly to you. I want political power for my community that is indispensable for our survival. The confrontation between you and Ambedkar is not a war between good and evil, but a meeting of two great visions. On one side is the redemption of the soul. On the other is liberation through law. When your body has grown too weak, when death is only a breath away, Ambedkar conceded because he did not want to be known as the one who took the life of the Mahatma. In the 24th of September, 1932, the Pune Pact was signed. You maintained unity, but in Ambedkar's heart, it was still a political defeat, a wound that you would later spend your entire life to make up for. When stepping out of prison, you no longer call them untouchables. You choose for them the most beautiful, most sacred name, children of God. You want the whole world to see the light of God in the most forsaken people. You found the Harijan Sevak Sangh organization. You publish the Harijan Weekly. Your spinning sound now harmonizes with fiery articles. You declare that if untouchability is a part of Hinduism, then you will become an open rebel against Hinduism itself, and then an extraordinary journey begins. From November 1933 to August 1934, you walk and travel more than 12,500 miles across the continent. Imagine your thin feet stepping on dusty roads, under the skin-scorching sun of India. You go to fundraise, go to apologize, go to embrace the Harijans. But that path is full of thorns. Radical conservative Hindus consider you an apostate. They stand on both sides of the road with black flags. They throw feces at your entourage. Even a shocking explosion rang out in Pune in June 1934. A bomb was thrown at your group's car. Smoke and dust filled the air. Screams rang out, but you still sat there, calm. You did not resent the assassin. You were only heartbroken because hatred was still so great. You realized that politics, with its power struggles and corruption, is no longer a place for your soul. In 1934, you officially resigned from the National Congress. You do not want nonviolence to be just a temporary political tactic. You want it to be a breath, a way of life. You retreat to Sevagram village, the village of service. Imagine a remote land in central India, where the red earth smells richly of rain and morning dew. You transform this place into a laboratory for the constructive program. You personally clean and sanitize, teach villagers how to build latrines, how to spin and weave khadi cloth. You believe that true freedom begins from laboring hands and a clean village. At Sevagram, you ponder the future of the younger generation. You see the British-style education system only creating machines that know how to read and write, but whose souls are empty. And so, Nai Talim, new education, is born. You teach children that holding a weaving needle or a hoe is as noble as holding a pen. You believe that true education built character. Education must be a harmony of hands, head, and heart. However, your soul is still a land of contemplative contradictions. You defend the Varna system as a natural division of labor, but vehemently condemn the discrimination between high and low. This makes you a target from all sides. Conservatives hate you for breaking tradition. Progressives and Ambedkar criticize you as a saint of the status quo because you do not want to completely abolish the caste system. You stand amidst the crossfire, lonely but steadfast, believing that the most sustainable change must come from the voluntary transformation of the heart, not the coercion of the law. Your life at Sevagram is a symphony of minimalism. You give up cow's milk, drinking only goat's milk. You perform harsh vows of abstinence to master your instincts. You encourage women to step out of the darkness of the kitchen, to participate in social activities. You see in them the strength of silent endurance, a quality closest to the spirit of Satyagraha. Although your thoughts still carry deep marks of tradition, you open doors that Indian women had never dared to dream of before. 1938. The world begins to shake with the hobnailed boots of fascists. In India, a new wave rises with the appearance of Subhas Chandra Bose, a young, enthusiastic man who does not believe in the patience of nonviolence. You see in Bose a reflection of your younger self, but carrying a different path. The deep disagreement between the two of you created a leadership crisis. When the candidate nominated by you failed against Bose, you uttered a humble yet weighty sentence. Sitaramaia's defeat was his defeat. You stand there, in the middle of the Sevagram field, looking toward the horizon darkening with the black clouds of World War II. You know that a new chapter, more fierce and more challenging, awaits your nation. But you also feel the stillness in the depths of your soul. Take a deep breath. Feel the smell of dry grass and the damp earth of Sevagram village. Listen to the steady spinning sound like a silent prayer. Rrr. All sounds of the world are receding. Only the peace of a soul that has completely dedicated itself to the truth remains. Let your body sink deep into absolute relaxation, each gentle breath, bringing you into the most tranquil sleep. You are sitting in the quiet darkness of a small room. The thunder rumbles from afar, not the thunder of a summer rain, but the echo of cannons from distant battlefields in Europe. September 1939, World War II breaks out, bringing with it a dark fog that envelops all of humanity. In the midst of the shaking world, you must face an arrogance from the rulers. Viceroy Lord Linlithgow unilaterally declares that India is at war alongside Britain, without even consulting any Indian leaders. You feel an electric current of indignation run down your spine. How can a nation in chains be asked to fight for the freedom and democracy of others? You declare decisively, India cannot participate in a war for freedom while they themselves are being denied that very right to be free. Despite your heart being full of resentment, the soul of a truth seeker within you does not allow hatred to override compassion. You look toward Adolf Hitler, a human being who is pushing the world into the abyss of destruction. And you, With all your humility and faith in human goodness, take up your pen to write 2 letters to him. You begin with the phrase, "Dear friend," not out of intimacy, but because you believe that even the most brutal person has a seed of goodness that needs to be awakened through love. You pleaded with Hitler to stop. You warned of the savage state that humanity would have to endure if the war continued. You hoped the voice of stillness could drown out the screams of weapons. But those letters fell into the void, like grains of sand sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Time passes in a deadlock. In 1942, when the Japanese army had neared the eastern border, the British began to fear. They send Sir Stafford Cripps with a promise of Dominion status after the war ends. You see through that flashy veneer. To you, it is just a post-dated check from a failing bank. You do not want vague promises. You want independence immediately. Right here and right now. That is when you make the boldest decision of your life. A decision that will completely change the course of history. The Quit India movement is born. Imagine you are standing in Bombay on the 8th of August 1942. The hot and stifling atmosphere of the rainy season. Tens of thousands of people are holding their breath listening to you. You are no longer the polite lawyer. You are the embodiment of the national will. Your voice rings out, warm but carrying the power of a shifting volcano. You give a brief mantra to the whole nation: do or die. We shall either free India or die in the attempt. That sentence is not a call for violence, but the final dedication of the soul to freedom. But in that very night, before the dawn of August 9 could break, the sound of hobnailed boots and police batons broke the silence. You, along with Nehru and the entire Congress leadership, are arrested in a flash. You are taken away amidst the hazy night, away from the simmering masses. The mass arrests push the country into a state of leaderless chaos. You sit in the prison room of the Aga Khan Palace in Pune, listening to heartbreaking news from the outside. The masses, out of sheer indignation and lack of direction, have broken out into violence. Railway stations burn, communication lines are cut. And the British responded with an unprecedented brutality. They even used aircraft to fire at unarmed crowds. Thousands have fallen. Tens of thousands are imprisoned. Your heart tightens as Satyagraha seems to be buried in smoke and blood. You are in pain, but you still insist that it was the stubbornness and harsh rule of the British that pushed your nation onto that ultimate path. 2 years of house arrest at the Aga Khan Palace, which should have been a magnificent palace, but now becomes a mausoleum of personal sorrows. Close your eyes and feel the melancholy stillness of this place. The smell of mold on the old stone walls. The sound of the wind blowing through the deserted corridors. The first tragedy struck only a few days after being arrested. Mahadev Desai, the loyal secretary, the soulmate, the one who recorded your every breath and thought for decades, passed away from a sudden heart attack. You stand silent before Mahadev's body, feeling as if a part of your own soul died with him. But the greatest pain was still ahead. The health of Kasturba, the devoted wife who had been by your side for over 60 years, began to collapse. She was tormented by asthma attacks and heart problems. You spend hours by her sick bed, holding those thin, wrinkled hands. Hands that had tasted so much poverty with you, so many times of imprisonment. On an afternoon in February 1944, the pale sunlight of the day's end cast through the prison window. Kasturba breathed her last right in your arms. You feel her warmth gradually vanishing, leaving only the coldness of nothingness. In that moment, the world around you fell completely silent. No more gunfire, no more politics. Only the ultimate loneliness of a man who has just lost the only pillar of his life. You collapse, both physically and mentally. You see yourself as an ancient tree that has just been uprooted in a storm in May 1944. Fearing you would pass away in prison and create an uncontrollable wave of rioting, the British released you for health reasons. You step out of the doors of the Aga Khan Palace, tired, weak, and lonely. But your eyes have never given up on the truth. You quickly realize a new political reality. The Muslim League, under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, has grown frighteningly strong. Jinnah no longer wants a unified India. He demands a separate nation, Pakistan. You decide to make one final effort to save unity. September 1944. You go to Jinnah's house in Bombay. Imagine two great men sitting opposite each other for 3 long weeks. You, in your simple loincloth, try to persuade him with the language of love and harmony. You even offered for Jinnah to be the Prime Minister of a unified India. You were ready to sacrifice all power to keep the integrity of the subcontinent. But Jinnah's heart had frozen behind the walls of religious nationalism. He resolutely rejected every offer. To Jinnah, Muslims were a separate nation and needed a separate territory. The negotiations dragged on in exhaustion and finally ended in failure. You step out of Jinnah's house, looking up at the Bombay sky gradually turning a deep purple. You feel an immense sadness. A painful separation is appearing before your eyes. A wound that perhaps can never be fully healed by Satyagraha. Take a deep breath. Feel the chill of the night gradually covering you. Listen to the slow beat of your heart. You have dedicated everything. You have endured everything. Now, let every political worry, every pain of loss, vanish into the void. You are being enveloped by a sacred peace, like a night wind soothing the wounds of the heart. Let your body completely relax. Every muscle, every cell, sink deep into sleep, where there are no borders, no wars, only the eternal silence of the soul. You are walking. Your bare feet touch the parched, rough earth of Noakhali. At 77, your body is just a thin skeleton wrapped in white khadi cloth, but your eyes still glow with a fierce faith, though your heart is bleeding. Around you, the air no longer carries the saltiness of the Dandi Sea, but is thick with the smell of ashes and hatred. August 1946. While the whole world is looking toward India's independence as a brilliant dawn, a pervasive darkness has fallen. The direct action day of the Muslim League turned into a nightmare. You hear the screams from Calcutta. The bloody massacre of the Great Calcutta Killing turned beautiful streets into open graveyards. Hindus and Muslims brothers who once spun with you, went to prison with you, now hold knives toward each other. You are in so much pain that you cannot find words. The work of religious unity that you spent your whole life cultivating is now shattering like shards of pottery under your feet. While politicians scramble for seats of power in Delhi, you choose a different path. You choose to go into the heart of the storm. Imagine yourself in Noakhali, a remote land where Muslims are surrounding Hindus. You walk barefoot from village to village, without weapons, without guards. You sleep in the simple huts of farmers. You organize joint prayer meetings under trees. The sound of you reading the Quran mingling with the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. You tell those holding weapons that you have come to serve them, and you are ready to die to prove that love is stronger than hatred. When the Bihar region burned with Hindus retaliating against Muslims, you set out again. You declared you would fast to death if the violence did not stop. Your presence, a thin but courageous old man, made the hands holding clubs tremble. The last viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, had to exclaim in amazement, "You were a one-man boundary force. You stood alone between two fires, using your soul as a barrier." But then, the 15th of August, 1947, finally arrived. Independence Day. A day that should have been the ultimate happiness of your life. However, your heart tightened at the partition. You called it the vivisection of the motherland. The country was carved in two, blood flowing like rivers on the refugee roads, while all of Delhi was bustling with the sound of fireworks and heroic speeches. Where were you? You were in a dark room in Calcutta, closing your eyes, fasting and praying. You did not eat, did not drink, did not celebrate. Your silence in Calcutta created a miracle of Calcutta. When the most notorious gangs saw the Mahatma wasting away because of them, they personally brought weapons to lay at your feet and swore to keep the peace. While the Punjab region in the west was drowning in a sea of blood, Calcutta was strangely quiet thanks to the power of your fasting. September 1947, you returned to Delhi. The capital is now no longer a city of emperors, but a city of refugees. The smell of fear and hatred rises from the concentration camps. Hindus and Sikhs returning from Pakistan carry horrific scars, and they vent their anger on Muslims in Delhi. You stand amidst the angry crowd. You resolutely protect the remaining Muslims. You prevent the conversion of temples into refugee camps. That stance turned you into a target of hatred from your own compatriots. Radical Hindus from organizations like the RSS and Hindu Mahasabha called you a traitor. They accused you of condoning the enemy. You hear insults echoing outside the house gates, but you only smile softly. To you, truth has no religion. The 13th of January, 1948. You begin the final hunger strike of your life. You set harsh conditions. The violence must end, and the Indian government must pay the debt of 550 million rupees, 55 crore, to Pakistan, according to the agreement. The whole country shook. People said you were choking national interests to please the enemy. But you knew that a nation's honor lies in keeping promises, even to opponents. Your body withered quickly. Your breath became heavy. But the moral force from your sickbed forced the government to concede. The money was paid. The leaders signed a peace pledge. You stopped the hunger strike on January 18, a final victory of Satyagraha over the selfishness of politics. Yet, The seeds of death had been sown. Nathuram Godse, a fanatic, and his accomplices decided that you must die. January 20. A bomb exploded right at your prayer meeting at Birla House. You did not flinch. You refused all police protection. You said, "If I am to die by the bullet of a madman, I must do so smiling. There must be no anger within me. God must be in my heart and on my lips." The afternoon of the 30th of January, 1948. A pale golden afternoon in Delhi. You just woke up from a nap, feeling weaker than ever. At exactly 5:17 p.m., you step out onto the lawn of Birla House to attend the daily prayer. You lean your shoulders on your two nieces, Abha and Manu, like two staffs supporting your life. Listen to your slow footsteps on the green grass. Crunch, crunch. The crowd parts to make way for the Mahatma. Suddenly, a man in a simple military-style outfit steps out. Nathuram Godse. He bows to you. Namaste. You nod back slightly. And then, 3 explosions tore through the silent space. Bang, bang, bang. 3 bullets from the Beretta pierced your thin chest. You did not fall immediately. You folded your hands in a prayer posture, a gesture of final forgiveness. Your lips moved with the last words. He ram. Everything around began to fade. The screams of the crowd, the sobbing of Abha and Manu, all receded into an infinite void. You fell to the ground, returning to the dust of the homeland that you loved with your last breath. That night, all of India sank into a terrifying silence. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, with a choked voice, announced on the radio, "The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere." More than 1 million people poured into the streets. A giant river of people saw you off to Rajghat on the banks of the Yamuna River. Smoke from the funeral pyre rose high into the sky, carrying the ashes of a soul that never knew hatred. From the distant west, Albert Einstein uttered memorial words that will echo forever. Generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth. You have gone, but your grain of salt is still there. The spinning wheel is still there, and above all, the faith and the power of gentleness is still silently warming this world. Take a deep breath. Feel the eternal stillness of the soul. No more pain of separation. No more brutal gunfire. Only the absolute fusion with the truth. Let your body completely loosen. Sink into a deep sleep, where the light of the Mahatma will forever guide you in the most peaceful dreams. Without noise, without needing to prove if you see it, the dim light by the window frame is now just a fragile border between dream and reality. The great soul that you have accompanied from a boy afraid of the dark until picking up a handful of salt to shake the most powerful empire in the world. Now he has receded like a thin mist. But what remains is the warm feeling in the left chest, the idea that truth and humanity can subdue all tyranny, and that true power always lies in the inner stillness within each of us. The rrr sound of the spinning wheel echoes from memory and then fades as lightly as a bird fluttering in the air. You breathe deeply once more. Close your eyes and let what you have heard today quietly take you back to the eternal sleep of peace.